Empire.
Hello and welcome to another live stream edition of the John Conn Report. Do me a favor, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. You watch it on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. And for those watching, you can see Bram Weinstein, the voice of the Commanders, here joining me. You can listen to him on ESPN 630. So this is a draft wrap-up show. Bram, we haven't had a chance to talk a lot about the draft. So I'm curious what you thought.
Well, I mean, I love Jaden Daniels. I'm glad that's what the decision was. They had me chasing my tail like they had us all chasing our tail for a few weeks there, even though it appears the decision was pretty clear for them. And, I think we've talked a lot here and on my show, through the last few months that I had a hard time buying that they would go in any different direction. Right. He just was too good of a talent. So I'm not surprised that's where they landed. And I'm obviously very excited about him. We can talk about him specifically. But then, the second and third round, I'm very excited about Mike Sanistril. Like, I think that was just a great pick. And then they started to check off a lot of boxes. They needed a young tight end. They got one. They needed a tackle. They got one. They needed a linebacker. They needed an edge rusher. They started to kind of address all of these types of issues. And, let's see how this plays out, over the next few years, really, more than anything. But in general, I'm very pleased. And, I think there's some work to do. Like, I don't think they addressed tackle in a way that I think they would be comfortable with heading into the season. We'll see how they deal with it now post-draft. But outside of that, the haul that they got, I'm hoping is going to work out for them. And it looks like 2-3 plug-in starters have come in immediately here.
Well, listen, and Johnny Newton is a pretty big part of that too. And the one thing too, I'm curious for, first of all, and I was talking about this for about a week or so leading in the draft, that the choice was not necessarily between Jaden and Drake May. It was it was more likely it was between Jaden and JJ. And that is really how it played out. And I know they said that Jaden was the top guy on their board, and I think other people there echoed that to me. Now, you always hear that after a pick is made. However, I do know it was not between Jaden and Drake. So we can that part was real. The other part too, Bram, that I'm curious on from your perspective, because every time there's a new group, every time you talk about oh my gosh, this haul, they got all these captains, et cetera. Well, they've gotten those in the past. Mm-hmm. But it does feel like the difference to me in this particular draft, what you hear immediately, and sometimes what you hear a year or two later is different, but what you hear immediately is that the fits, right? Like they have a plan for these players. And I think that's something that I don't always feel like existed in the past, that there was a good enough plan overall in a plan that was in sync with what people drafting might think versus what some of the assistant coaches might think, et cetera. That to me kind of stood out with this as well.
Yeah. The Newton pick, we could talk about it, I think was best player available that they actually, probably didn't truly expect him to be there. Maybe they thought he might be, once the second day started. But they needed, we talked about this a lot. And the way we were talking about it for months was obviously they're going to take a quarterback. Obviously, they're going to try to get a tackle. I think obviously they need a corner, but that's the one that I think might fall through the cracks, if you will, of the boxes that need to be checked. And it didn't work out that way. And I'll say another thing just largely about the draft in general. And you just don't know, how these people are going to, act until you see them do it. And we all know they needed a tackle. And we all know that they tried to get back into the first round and it just didn't get accomplished. And so there was no willing taker for them. And then once Amarius Mims went 18 to the Bengals, I don't think this is going to happen on day one. And then you get to day two and you just all of a sudden you're assuming that they're going to take a tackle early, but the run on the better prospects had ended and was gone. And so are they going to overdraft a player? And I actually thought it was very telling that they didn't, that they went, at a position group that was a little unexpected, but the player was probably a little higher up on their board than they expected. They didn't think he'd be there. Then they traded out a 40 and moved down, and you still expected a tackle. And you'll notice that like the next kind of round of tackles didn't really start to go off the board till right before they were going to be drafting again. And so did they want Rosengarten from Washington? Did they want somebody else that they made a choice between? I don't know. And you'll never get a true answer about that. But what they proved to me was they're not going to go out of their way, even though there's a need to overdraft somebody. And I thought that was kind of an important takeaway to me, especially in the second round, and even trading down to acquire a third second round pick and still not, quote unquote, overdrafting a player because he wasn't that high on their board.
Oh, I agree. And that's why I like picks like Newton and Sanders still too. Now they needed a corner, but you kept thinking outside.
Yeah.
They got a guy who can be a playmaker inside. And I also think this is where I talk about fit. Because one of the things Quinn talks about when he talks about guys near the line is their blitzing ability. One of the things with Jamin Davis, they wanted to see, can he be a good blitzer? When you see like a Jordan McGee, the linebacker from Temple, that's something I think he could do well. Now in coverage, I wasn't all that wowed with him, but I think as a guy moving as a linebacker who going forward, I think he can do, right? So like that's how I think there's a vision for them. And it's funny, Bram, because like even like looking at last year's class, even at the end of the draft, I was like, I didn't see where you're going to get a lot of contributions from this class. A lot of things didn't really add up and make sense to me beyond the first pick in a lot of ways. And I'm a big Quan Martin fan, but so with this class, I think each of these guys makes sense. Now, the one thing I want to get into, because a lot of people are going to ask about this as well, is the left tackle position.
Yeah.
One thing to note, like they took Coleman, and one thing, like when people see the range of guys on the board, there's not always this huge gap between a guy who might get drafted 35 or 40 versus a guy who drafted in the 60s or something like that. The gap is much closer than you probably realize in a lot of cases. I think in this tackle class, that's the case. I don't know if Coleman can be their starting left tackle. That's what I don't know. And I do know that Cornelius Lucas is a good backup who could come in and start. I would say, I want to see the kid on the field because you don't know, but what's your thoughts on that position and how they have addressed it?
Well, I think that, like they weren't trading out of number 2. The hope was there'd be, the board started to fall the way I think a lot of us expected it to. There'd be a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of wide receivers. At some point, somebody would take a defensive player and that would start a run there. And I think the hope was that one or two of these many really high-end prospects at the position that they needed would fall into the 20s. And at that point, they would then have the possibility of moving up to get one of them. And that's why I mentioned Amarius Mims. Not that I know whether they wanted him or not, but his name going off at 18 told me everything I needed to know. The players that they might target aren't going to get there. So the tackles went, not only was there a run of them, there just was the really good ones went as high as most of the mock draft pundits thought they would. So this put them in a situation. The only player that fell into the 20s that I felt was a viable name was the tackle from Arizona, whose name I'm forgetting now, that went to Green Bay, and he went around 25 or 26. And again, this is without knowing whether they liked him or targeted him. But once that was gone, it was going to be very, very, very difficult for them to accomplish this. And then now we get to day 2 and you start asking the questions, are they going to overdraft a player because they have the need? And they didn't do it. And I thought that showed a lot of restraint, a lot of discipline, but I think they know they have to address this. And like hopefully the third round pick is someone that they can, they can become a starter whenever that will be. My expectation is they will sign a tackle, a veteran in this next wave of free agency, and he'll come in and compete for this job. And, this also goes back to, there were a lot of holes to fill. You only have so many draft picks. And I think they wanted to fill this. It just didn't happen. So they have to reverse course. And I said this last year, I'm like, this team screams taking a left tackle with their first round pick. Well, everything changed. They went in a different direction, and they had too high of a pick to think of it that way. Next year screams taking a left tackle with their first round pick. I just think this year they're going to have to figure out a way to bridge through with veterans, or the hope is the third round picks ahead of the curve.
Right. And Mims was a guy that I think they felt might slip through the cracks a little bit, that I think really would have tempted them big time to move up. The other problem with moving up too is nobody wanted to move back. Like I was told Friday morning, nobody wanted to move back more than 3 or 4 spots, and certainly not to 36. So I think that was a hard thing. And then it's like, if you want to go up higher, now you're mortgaging more of the future to get one position. And that's why I say, like, then you have to measure the gap between how you see guys up here versus how you see them over here, and the impact they can have on the team. So I think the other hard part, and I'm not sold that they're going to bring another left tackle in. Like, I'm not sure who's going to become available that would really challenge for a starting job at this point, when you have, you do have a guy you can throw in there, and Lucas, who is your swing tackle, unless you get fortunate that a guy like a Leno, someone who can be a placeholder for a couple of years or even a year, can come out. That doesn't happen very often. So I think Coleman's got to develop, and but I don't know. And I'm going to have his coach on here at some point on the podcast, but I don't know what the likelihood of that is. I do know that some people think he can be a left tackle in this league. Some line coaches I really respect, and they feel like he's a good athlete and felt he was a good value pick. But when does he become that? And I think the other thing in this too with the offensive line, it's funny because I keep getting asked about the offensive line. Well, they addressed it in free agency. They signed a center and they signed a starting center and starting guard. We just don't know. In week 6, we are not sure who's going to be that left tackle. But I also am curious on the impact of the scheme and the coaching on the line.
Yeah.
And that,
okay. They signed a center. They signed somebody they think is going to compete to be the starting left guard. Like I don't think that's a promise to Allegretti. And I think the hope is he's going to be a starting left guard.
Yeah.
Cosby's a good carryover. We haven't talked about Andrew Wiley yet. I'm willing, and I a lot of people in the chat after I say this, I'm willing to hear out a do-over with him at right tackle. That, let's see if scheme is a little bit different for him. Let's see if it works a little different for him. He is a pro. No one's calling him a Pro Bowler here, but you might see a better result. I'm open-minded to you might see a better result with a different scheme with him at right tackle. But at left tackle, I would describe it as I'm not overly comfortable with what's there right now. And I do expect them to do something to address it. They do have a lot of cap room. That said, and this, like, teams are not apt to trade good tackles. They don't do it. And they're not available very often. But at some point in this spring, or maybe into the summer, into training camp, where there's a surprise veteran release or somebody's available, I think they're going to have to bring in another veteran in here to compete. That's what I think is going to happen. And I expected this.
Right.
Virginia Slim just threw up in my mouth, Bram, on Wiley. I know I'm in the minority of this, but I am open-minded to give that one another shot because I do think he's a pro, and I'm not so sure that what you saw from him last year in that scheme benefited him very much.
Well, nobody would benefit from dropping back 70% of the time. And somebody brought up the old tackle from Green Bay. David Bakhtiari has played in the last 3 years. He's played a combined 14 games. Or 13 games. Sorry, not the answer. You can't bring in a guy who hasn't been, on the field and durable just because. And so I don't know that there's, like I said, I think they feel comfortable with what they have. Whether or not they should, it's hard to say because I haven't seen the guy in the field. I do remember when Brandon Sheriff was picked, and everybody's like, I remember before that draft, it was like, okay, he's a tackle, or he could play guard. Well, you watch him in the first week or two of practice, especially against the Texans, you realize he's a guard. So I don't know that with Coleman. I think it sounds like he's a good athlete. And when you watch him, he's a good player, but what position? And so the other thing too, is when you bring up like Ben Sanoot, the tight end, when you watch him play, like, he's going to help that line as well as an extra blocker. So that's why I say there are things I'm still curious about with the line. And like, the line there were other issues instead of just the line. and some of it was coaching. Some of it was a young quarterback who needed more help from coaches, from the line, et cetera, and from himself. But I think that Sanu, when you watch him block Bram, he's going to help the run game too. And
Sinut? Is that how you pronounce his name? I thought it was Sinnott.
Sinnott. Well, Sinnott. Well, then it's Sinnott. Sorry. Ben is Ben. So Sinnott. Yeah, you're right. Sinnott. So my bad, Ben. But when you watch him play, he's going to be a good blocker. Like, that's what he does. And so I think like that's something to watch as well. Like how those guys can help the line as well.
Look, just think about this for a moment. Okay. They've signed, I don't know, was it 20 free agents, somewhere in that neighborhood? They just drafted 9 players. They brought in a bunch of undrafted free agents. We'll see what happens with them. I mean, they're staring down, 30 plus different faces on this team. And in a salary cap era, guess what? Nobody has a complete roster anymore. So there were going to be holes, and I'm going to find this one comment from Amy who said this. Why is it always that they're 2 or 3 years away? That's been said for years. Why can't they win this year like the Texans did? It's always 2 to 3 years away every year. I agree that Washington's actually a wild card here based on Jaden Daniels. Like if he is ahead of the curve, we might expect some different results this year if our division is willing to comply. Remember that part of the Texans thing too. The Colts lost Anthony Richardson, reset year. The Titans were in a reset year, and the Jaguars underperformed, which helped them get to the place where they got to. Is Washington in a situation where Philadelphia and Dallas are going to be very average? I think that's hard to know. And Washington's a wild card here because I have these visions of Jaden Daniels having a CJ Stroud-like start to his career too. And I hope that you're right about that. And I hope they get off to a good start. But the larger point is, and the Texans will tell you this too, they had an incomplete roster last year. They just kind of got off on a really good start. I'm hoping this happens too, but we have one just like everybody else, and left tackle's part of it. So to think that they were going to fill every hole, considering how much they did to reshape the roster, I think is being a little overly optimistic about the job that could be done. And largely, and this is obviously biased, but like largely, I think they've done an unbelievable job baselining the roster and what they've done to this point, but they're not complete. And I don't think they would tell you they are, honestly, heading into the spring now.
No, not at all. And to be clear, like, I don't know how far away they are because, again, we don't know the impact of the coaching. I mean, it's like, I think that defensive staff will be really good. And I think this defense, I expect it to be much improved. So I think that's the hard part to know is we can all see the roster and the players, but what's the impact of the coaching on these guys? What's the impact of having a new defensive backs coach and system for Benjamin St. Juste? How does it help Emmanuel Ford's development? I don't know those answers yet, right? So I think that's something that's going to be seen too. And, to be clear, when I'm talking about, Ben Sinnott, I'm not saying he's enough to make up for a left tackle. But what I am saying is he can help the line in the run game, and you can mitigate some other issues as well in that. And we don't know, nobody on here knows what Coleman can do. Like just Googling and watching a couple plays on there is like, I don't know. And all I know is that they draft him to play it. I want to see him play it before I make up my mind whether or not he can. I do have questions about everything with that, as you should, because we don't know. And he wasn't a top pick. But again, when you're needing a lot of guys, the best way to get better is to draft good players. And if you think Newton and Samuel are your guys in that round, then get them, because that's how you get better. And so I'm okay with that. The other thing is someone brought up DJ Humphries. DJ Humphries is coming off a torn ACL. So I don't think he's going to be the answer either. So I think that's what I'm saying. It's hard to find guys at that spot. They have to make it work.
Someone else said David Bakhtiari.
That's what I said.
And he's barely played over the last year. Serious knee injuries. So, I mean, that to me is a total risk. If he'd be willing to come here, you bring him in. My expectations would be low because physically he's been able to perform a long time now. And this is a tough position. It's a hard one to get. People typically hang on to them. They're hard to acquire, but I'll stick to my guns here. I do believe they're going to acquire another veteran one way or the other at some point. I don't see how they're totally comfortable with the setup as it is right now.
I don't know, like, and I don't know, how do you acquire that veteran and who's worthy of that to give up a pick to do that? That's the hard part. Now, if you go out and if it's a release, then you're still getting a guy who was released, and you don't give up good left tackles very often, right? So I think that's going to be that to me, Bram, is the hard part with that. And I think that's something. Listen, if it comes available, that's great. I don't know that it will. And the other thing is with the Texans, and someone else also brought up that the Texans played in a different division. Like, this is a really good division. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not expecting a Texans like rise just because this division's really good. And if they have that, then more power to them. But I just think it's hard to. I wasn't anticipating what Houston did last year. I wasn't anticipating Jacksonville kind of laying an egg down the stretch. But I think, like, it's funny because I talked to D'Amico Ryans at the owners' meetings about that. Like, why did you guys work? Like, what turned it around for you? And first of all, you get the right quarterback with the second pick. Second of all, as he said, like, this is going to sound Joe Gibbs like, but you win with people, right? And like, they felt like they drafted they also had Will Anderson from the year before. They drafted Tank Dell. They had some really good picks that hit. You can get that. You can make a big improvement. Whether or not they make the playoffs and win, whatever they do, I don't know. Trades, free agents, quarterbacks, and all kinds of adventures await the Commanders this offseason. Looking for an adventure of your own? The Adventure Park at Sandy Spring has you covered. The country's largest ropes course and zipline park, located in Montgomery County, Maryland, is now open. Named Best Amusement Park and Climbing Destination in the DMV 2 years in a row, the Adventure Park at Sandy Spring is perfect for birthdays, corporate outings, groups, and families. With challenges anywhere from beginner to expert, there is something for all skill levels. Anytime you're thinking about reaching new heights, make sure you know before you go. The Adventure Park at Sandy Spring is the only ACCT accredited park in Maryland or Virginia. Staying on the ground, give axe throwing a try. You can throw at traditional targets or play any number of interactive games. You can even upload your own image. So there you have it, folks. Climbing, ziplining, axes, food, and bonfires right in your backyard. Reserve your adventure today at www.theadventurepark.com/kind. That's www.theadventurepark.com/kind. Now, the other one, Dak wants to, could you see him trading Allen for a tackle? No, I don't. No. And here, let me go first on that real quick. Part of it is that they're very big on building up the middle. And you now have two really good tackles, and you improved your linebacker situation. They feel like they've improved their safety situation. I don't see them weakening that, and I don't know. I'd have to explore what teams who would be wanting to do that, to trade a left tackle for a guy that, could be in Allen's situation. I would have a hard time seeing that, but I have a hard time seeing them make that trade as well. Newton could be really good, but I think there's nothing wrong with having three tackles who can pressure the passer. And that's what he does. He's different than Mathis too.
I'm going to tell you no on Allen. And I'll tell you why, just from what I've heard, being around the team lately, he's locked in.
Yes.
And they love him. And if you go ask Dan Quinn about, uncertainty about him, he'll look at you sideways. Yeah. He's not going anywhere. He's still part of the future. He's back locked in. And I've only heard like he's re-energized about this whole thing and they want him here. So that ain't happening. Like the whole John Allen is upset and all that stuff is a thing of the past with this group.
Right. And I've been saying that for a while, that he's not sitting here upset about anything. I think for him during the season, who wasn't upset? Like, it got to a point where you knew it wasn't going to work. So, and if you're at his stage, do you want this long rebuild? Well, no, who would? But like from the time Quinn got here, all I've heard is John's in a good spot. John's in a really good spot. They like him. They want him here. And even though like he missed the first part of the OTA work, but it was because of a long scheduled vacation. He had been there already working out. The coaches were familiar with him. Like, it was not, like he would, when he made this trip, you weren't planning on having to be there in early April, and it was a trip that cost a ton. And he had already been there, right? And he's already back there, so it wasn't an issue for them. So anyway, he's in a good spot, and they're in a good spot with him.
How about this one? What role do you see the rookie D tackle Johnny Newton playing?
I mean, to me, he's a guy who's going to be. I could see him being the third tackle, Bram, based on what I've seen in him in college and what they think of him. I could see him being they rotated those guys a lot last year, different group. And I think with Quinn, I could see him using him in some way a lot. And maybe you get to some more 5 D-line sets where you can cause some pressure with 3 guys who can rush the passer with him, Allen, and Payne. So what I liked with that pick is how Peters asked Quinn, hey, can you get him on the field? Like, of course, right? You'll find a way because he's a good player. So I think they have a, this is what I'm saying. I think they have a plan for these guys. I think for him, it's to get him in there. You can rotate them, but he can rush the passer. You get those guys in the field, especially a guy like Dan Quinn, like that's what he wants. So I definitely see him again, without seeing him on the field yet, what we know right now, I could see him having a good role with this defense.
Yeah. For me, like, I think this is one of those where I don't think they intended to draft him. I just think he was too good of a prospect on their board once he was there, and they just couldn't pass him up. If you go watch him at Illinois, he does move up and down the line a little bit. And there was one thing that happened at the end of last year that was noticeable about the line, but was effective, was Deron Payne moved outside sometimes. Not often, but did, and actually was effective from the edge at times, kind of reinvigorated him. And he started having some, people forget because the record was what it was. But he started to become much more effective that way. So I think this offers this unusual 3 defensive tackle alignment where you have specifically athletic defensive tackles like Newton and Payne, and it gives them options. I'm with you that I don't know what it's really going to look like, but I do think there are some interesting options with those 3 on the field together now.
Absolutely. And, so I got a couple more here. Dr. Wonderful. Any chance they return to Leno, or has he retired? No. He ended up having hip surgery. I don't think he's going to be ready. And my own guess is that unless something changes, I think he's done. And I think because he even said on the podcast when I had him on that, maybe during the season, if something happens and, the right situation arises, that's not a solution for these guys at this point. So no, and now we're going back to what it was that everybody said they wanted to get away from anyways. So everybody's talking about these injured guys. Like that's not the answer. And that's why, and as others have pointed out, it's not like Coleman hasn't played left tackle. He has. The question isn't so much, did he play in college? What can he do in the NFL? And there are definitely some people thought him as a tackle, some as a guard. So that's why I want to see him as a tackle, see what he can do. I think he can be a good player at one of those spots. They clearly think he's a tackle. So that's what we know.
2 more names before we go. And SCA said, De'Ami Brown's been underwhelming. Could Luke McCaffrey challenge for his depth chart spot?
Different
McLaurin, Dotson, Crowder, I think Zacchaeus right now, that would be 4. McCaffrey 5, assuming all things go well. De'Ami Brown would be 6. 6 receivers, pretty typical. Till I hear otherwise, I don't know. Again, he's a name, a carryover that we don't know how they feel about him, but let's see. Let's see.
There's 2 things I know. One, De'Ami Brown is very fast, and they want to throw the ball deep. Now, we've heard that before with him, right? I heard last year, he's a great fit for that system. And then it's like, it didn't really happen. But he can get the ball deep. So I'll be curious to see what they envision for him. They're also different spots. So McCaffrey would be more of the slot. That's not De'Ami Brown. So I think, with that, but I think you're talking about roster spot versus positional spot. But
yeah, I mean, right now, if you look at the receiver group, I don't know who would beat him out. And I don't think that it's Luke McCaffrey versus him would be the way I would put it.
Right. That's how I would say too. And I think, so I'd be curious to see, because Crowder is more the slot. And I know he's returning, but that's one thing. Someone else wanted to talk about, people forget about Ricky Stromberg and Braden Daniels from last year's draft. No MV, they have not. That's the problem. That's why they're in this spot. Now, I will say, Ricky Stromberg, and you heard Leno say this if you listened to him on the podcast here, that there were guys in that room who felt like he should have been starting at center. And last year, before he got hurt. So I think, like, I'm curious to see how he develops, but they obviously signed Biadasz for a reason. And because they don't know. I don't know what they thought about Daniels last year. That group thought about him before the draft. But I do think I'm curious to see how he develops. Daniels had a long way to go. So if he develops, fine. But he looked like he had a long way to go. I would not count on him doing that. And so I don't think people have forgotten about him. I really haven't heard him mention him much at all. Doesn't mean he can't develop, but I would not count on that. And again, they drafted Coleman because they knew they needed a left tackle. Now, could he develop into a backup? Maybe. We'll see. I mean, again, give him a chance to improve, but he did not show anything last summer to suggest that in the next year he would be the guy that could ascend to that role. That would be my take. So
the only other name that I want to bring up, because I just haven't brought it up, is I'm also excited about Dom Hampton out of Washington.
Yes, I like him.
He's got the traits, the look, the feel, violent, long arms, fast. And Washington got a tremendous amount of hype for Penix and Odunze and all the offensive players, rightfully so, for as far as they got. Defensively, he was a standout for them. And you don't get, go ask Caleb Williams about this. You don't get this far with one side of the ball being good and the other side being a wreck. And Washington wasn't that way on that side of the ball. That was a spot where some depth was needed again. Remember, Cam Curl's not here. So, I like Quan Martin. I'm going to be very interested to see how they utilize him. I want to see what they think about him on the field. I think they're going to like Derek Forrest a lot as a carryover. He plays with that speed and violence they like. But this guy might be someone who plays a strong-ish backup role. The only other safety out there, right, that I can think of is Jeremy Reeves, who's really a special teamer. So I liked this pick as well. It kind of fit in the kind of modus operandi of the type of players that they're looking for. He's got the traits. I'm not going crazy here. He's a fifth-round pick. He's a fifth-round pick for a reason, but I did like that one as well.
Right. And by the way, someone else for the receivers brought up Mitch Tinsley. Like, I don't put him ahead of those guys, but again, we'll see how they develop. And it's a new group. I just think there's a lot of unknowns how they view. Boy, they have the same receivers coach, so that is one thing. But I'll see how they develop. But he doesn't have the speed. If you want to get the ball deep, you want guys with speed. So this is another one, Bram, too. Zach wants to know, with all the linebackers signed and drafted, how will Jamin fit in? Most likely walking in free agency after this year? ? And someone else said Jamin will have a Pro Bowl type year with this coaching staff. So there's some opinions. So I will say this. There are definitely people over there who feel like this staff will help him out a lot and that it could make a big difference. But you also signed two guys in free agency, and you also signed, like you brought up Dom Hampton. Hampton can play that big nickel role for them, like the cover. If he can show that he can cover tight ends, he could go and play early on. I like his physical play up near the line. So that could cut into some of their packages. I don't know for Jamin, Bram, how they're going to use him per se, because you can't, they like Wagner a lot. They love Frankie Louvu, and they should. But Jamin's got some talent too, and I'll be curious to see how the impact of this coaching staff on him. So I'm withholding judgment. I'm not shocked. I wasn't surprised at all that they didn't pick up a fifth-year option. There was no reason to, because you just don't know. And why would you invest that kind of money in a guy that you're not really sure about yet? But I do think there could be an impact. But I also wonder, Bram, how much action he'll get, how they'll work all these guys in there. What do you think?
Yeah, his role is undetermined to me.
Right.
I'm like you, also not surprised they didn't pick up the fifth-year option, and they're not going to commit themselves to that. Doesn't mean they can't re-sign him at a later date. I've thought, in watching him through the years so far, that he's better going straight line forward than he is trying to get out in coverage. Mm-hmm. So maybe they'll find a way to utilize his speed and athleticism that way, because he can be a devastating playmaker with his speed. Will they use him on the edge a little bit as a stand-up rush end? I don't know. I have to ask them, but I could see that conceivably being a role. Maybe. I don't know. Is he going to be someone who's more apt to blitz, than maybe get caught in coverage? Yeah, that's what I think. But he's an undetermined role, and I'll be interested to see. I do know this, and this is why I don't want to ever give up on him. he's such a tremendous high level athlete that if someone can get, flip the light bulb on for him and find the spot where he can be successful, then he's an asset. So that's why I'm hoping that they can figure that out. All right, hold on. Before we go, you have to answer the question, which
let me say one more thing on Jamin, because that is one thing they wanted to know, like, can he be an effective blitzer? Because I think that's a role they would see him in. He's not necessarily a rush end, because I don't see him lining up like that. But I don't know that they don't see him that way. But I would have a hard time with that. But I think as a blitzer, that's what they're going to need to find out. Can he do that effectively? Because that's going to be a big part of this defense, and that's where Sanders still, as a slot corner, can be a big help too, because he is a good blitzer as well. So I think it gives you some versatility and more options. Go ahead.
All right, last thing. What number is Jaden Daniels getting, John? Like, no one seems to have reported this yet. What number is it?
Well, I would be surprised if he's anything but number 5. So I think one thing I will say is I do think he knows and has been told what a respected player Tress Way is and what a good guy he is. So my guess is Tress understands things very well and would know, like, the importance of this kid to the future of this franchise. And I could see, I don't know anything just yet. There's other things that I have to worry about before we get to the numbers. But knowing Tress and knowing how Daniels would approach it, I could see something being worked out where he would get number 5. So that's what I would say. But I don't know. That's just my guess. That's not anything other than I know that he's been versed on Tress and what a good guy he is and what an important player he is here, because he's been a good player for a long time for this franchise. So you've got to approach it respectfully, and I think he will. I think one of the things, Bram, too, from the press conference last week with Daniels, he certainly seems to understand the history and this organization's place in the game, et cetera, and what it means to the city. I mean, he's a football junkie. I think that's one of the things that in talking to a lot of people about him, he's a football junkie. So I think whatever happens with it, it would be approached with a lot of respect for Tress Way.
Good. Join the club. I'm a football junkie too.
Can you play quarterback?
No.
You play left tackle.
You do. I can't play left tackle either.
I've seen your kick step. It ain't pretty.
I think I'm satisfied with my role. My role is where I should be.
Me too. I'm okay over here. It's listen, the one thing I've always said about being a sports reporter, Bram, is like, I can sit here and tell you, be very definitive on what's going to happen in a game or something like that. And then when the opposite happens, I can be definitive about why it happened. It's a great, sometimes you can never be wrong, I guess, right? Even though we often are. So anyways, Bram, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and I'll be back with another episode. What is it? What's today? Tuesday? Hopefully Thursday. I think Thursday morning I'll be back with one, and I'll have a few next week. So talk to you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.